Why do you, a complete stranger, insist on staying in our house for so long?" My sister-in-law reprimanded me with an angry voice. After losing my beloved husband, I continued living with my in-laws. Was I not allowed to be there? Even my usually kind mother-in-law began to criticize me harshly. "If that's how it is, I'll leave on my own," were the words screamed in my heart, but I suppressed them. "I understand," I said while vowing revenge. "My name is Amelia, and I am 40 years old. I work as an elementary school teacher. My husband, Jacob, also an elementary school teacher at a different school, was 42 that year. We were married for 12 years, having met at the first elementary school I worked at after graduating from college. Jacob, 2 years my senior, was a reliable senior colleague who taught me various things about school life. Through work, we were drawn to each other and eventually got married. Despite our love for children, we didn't have any of our own. My father-in-law passed away in his 50s before we got married, and Jacob lived with his mother until I joined the family. Thanks to the real estate and other assets inherited from my father-in-law, my mother-in-law was financially secure. However, since the beginning of our marriage, we had decided to pay $2,000 monthly to my in-laws. We had a dream we wanted to realize, and despite needing to save for it, we regularly transferred money to my in-laws for utilities, food, and a small rent. Out of a sense of duty, we continued to work as teachers, increasingly worried about the growing number of children not attending school. Our dream was to establish a learning center where such children could study comfortably. Jacob's older sister, Lena, who is 3 years older than him, is married and lives in another state. My sister-in-law has a son, but he left home last spring for studies, so it should be just the two of them now. Although living about an hour's drive away, my sister-in-law visited every weekend, asking my mother-in-law for financial help. "My son's tuition is short. Can you help a little?" My sister-in-law would softly ask. "Really? It can't be helped. How much do you need?" My mother-in-law would spoil my sister-in-law. For some reason, Jacob couldn't understand why. Frustrated, he finally asked his sister one day, "You received a fair amount from Dad's inheritance, right? Why are you always short of money?" he asked incredulously. My sister-in-law then retaliated, "You don't have any kids, so you wouldn't understand. Raising children is incredibly expensive. You talk about inheritance, but that money can't last forever." However, my sister-in-law's spending was clearly excessive, even in my eyes. Once she asked for money for education, another time for home repairs, and before that for food. Every time, my mother-in-law would give my sister-in-law a considerable amount. I couldn't understand why. That day, we went to our respective schools as usual, an ordinary morning with the usual scenery until that phone call. I received news that Jacob had collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Urged to hurry there, I exclaimed in shock, "What?" My husband collapsed. Confused, but upon reaching the hospital, I found Jacob unconscious, and he had to undergo thorough examinations. I wished it was all a bad dream, but despite aggressive treatment, Jacob passed away that night. Faced with this unexpected event, I didn't even have time to cry, immediately taking leave from work to arrange the funeral. I felt I couldn't mentally survive otherwise. My mother-in-law, likely more heartbroken than me, courteously received the mourners throughout the funeral. It was an opportunity to meet my sister-in-law's family again. My sister-in-law, her husband Robert, and their son Alex, who was a college student, helped devotedly. However, my sister-in-law herself didn't seem to grieve over her own brother's death. It almost seemed like she was happy about it. After Jacob's funeral, I returned to my mother-in-law's house. My sister-in-law's family said they had other things to do and went home without dropping by. Then, my mother-in-law spoke quietly, "Amelia, I never thought being bereaved of my son would be this lonely." Hearing these words, my pent-up sadness burst out, and I broke down crying. "If it's okay with you, would you stay in this house forever? I'm lonely living by myself." My mother-in-law spoke kindly to me. "Let's support each other from now on, Mother. I replied, wiping away my tears. However, more troubles followed. Just as we decided to live together, my mother-in-law suddenly collapsed. It might have been due to the grief of losing her son. She was diagnosed with a stroke. Fortunately, she survived but was left with paralysis on her right side. My mother-in-law, relying on a cane, wished to continue living in her house. There are so many memories in this house. I want to spend my time here, she said with slightly slurred speech, but with determination. I'm fine, so please continue to focus on your work, Amelia, my mother-in-law kindly told me. However, I was worried about leaving my half-paralyzed mother-in-law alone at home. We decided to use long-term care insurance for home care with the help of a helper. Even after Jacob passed away, I continued to contribute $2,000 monthly for my mother-in-law. However, my sister-in-law started visiting her mother more frequently. I understand your worry about your mom, especially after what your sister-in-law said. Based on past experiences, you've learned not to easily believe her words. Your mother-in-law, dealing with mobility issues and feeling weak, expressed a desire for Lena, your sister-in-law, to live with you. You questioned Lena's intentions and her husband's plans, surprised that Alex, her husband, is already in college and not at home. Your mother-in-law reassured you, saying it's okay for Lena to live with you, and her husband might move in eventually. Despite feeling uneasy, you tentatively agreed. However, you had lingering concerns about your sister-in-law's potential interference. Your unresolved anxiety led you to leave the house for a week, entrusting your mother-in-law's care to the helper. Before leaving, you instructed your mother-in-law to follow the helper's guidance and not give money to Lena. You also expressed worry about your sister-in-law visiting in your absence. Despite trying to concentrate on your training, the worry persisted. Upon returning home, your sister-in-law welcomed you with a smug smile, indicating that something had transpired during your absence. When your mother-in-law accused you of wanting to put her in a facility, you felt confused and overwhelmed. Your sister-in-law chimed in, alleging that you had previously expressed a desire to place your mother-in-law in a facility, a statement you insistently denied. The atmosphere became tense, leaving you to grapple with the unexpected turn of events. My sister-in-law told me, "It's fine because we're strangers anyway." She had a harsh look on her face and said that I should take care of Mom from now on, so she doesn't want me around anymore. My mother-in-law also angrily screamed at me, telling me to leave quickly. It was hard to believe. She called me a nuisance and asked me to go without arguing. I agreed and left, holding back my tears. I packed my things, leaving behind items filled with memories of Jacob. I only took the essentials. Before leaving, I thanked them for everything. My sister-in-law, eager to drive me out, told me to leave quickly. I left the house with a mix of sadness and frustration, feeling disturbed in my heart. I returned to my parents' home without notice. My mother was surprised to see me and asked about the luggage. I didn't want to talk about it at the moment, telling her I'll go to work and asking to be left alone for a while. In the empty room at my parents' house, I laid down the luggage and gazed at the ceiling, letting my thoughts wander. I wondered about my sister-in-law's plans for her own family. My mother-in-law had mentioned that Robert might move in with her, but I didn't sense such intentions from my sister-in-law. I tried to think it wasn't my business anymore, but thoughts of my mother-in-law troubled me. Then, I remembered something. The day before Jacob collapsed, he tried to tell me something and handed me an envelope, but he was called away by his mother. I never got to know what was inside. Curious and worried, I opened the envelope to check its contents. The next day, I left for work from my parents' house, reported my training to the principal, and carried on with my duties as if nothing had happened. As I prepared to leave, I told a colleague that I was leaving, and they commented on the possible exhaustion from the training and the difficulty of losing my husband. However, my hurried home was due to fatigue or sorrow over Jacob's death. I needed to contact Robert and inquire about the situation with my sister-in-law. Considering the conversation might turn serious, I hesitated to use my personal phone in a public place where anyone could overhear. On my way home, I sent an email to Robert expressing my desire to talk to him in person, mentioning that I had something to discuss regarding my wife. Robert replied immediately. When I got home, I locked myself in my room and called Robert. He seemed to have been waiting for my call and responded with relief. I explained to him that Lena was staying at her mother's house and making false claims. I shared that I had been accused of trying to send my mother-in-law to a nursing home based on these lies, and as a result, was driven out of the house. "Where are you now?" Robert asked in surprise. I replied that I was at my parents' house and detailed everything that had happened since the funeral. Robert sincerely apologized, but I reassured him, saying he didn't need to apologize. I then revealed that my sister-in-law had a history of leaving home without notice and spending money freely, which seemed to have intensified since her son Alex went to college. "Wait, Lena was receiving money from her mother. What happened to that money?" he asked. I knew my mother-in-law had been giving my sister-in-law a significant amount of money. I haven't heard anything about that. I've been paying for Alex's tuition, and our family has always been in a tight financial situation. Robert replied, sounding surprised. "Actually, I have a request. Could you come to my parents' house next Sunday?" I proposed. I felt a bit presumptuous making such a request, but I decided to try it. Their house was about a 30-minute drive from my parents' house and was on the way to my mother-in-law's house. I had planned to meet Robert and then head to my mother-in-law's house together. "Understood. I know roughly where it is, so I'll rely on navigation. I'll contact you again when I'm close." Robert agreed to my suggestion and ended the call. Shortly after, I received a call from my mother-in-law's house. I wondered what it could be just a day after the previous events. With that thought, I answered the phone. "Hey you! You've used money without permission, didn't you? Give it back immediately," my sister-in-law yelled at me. Confused, I asked, "What do you mean by using money without permission?" I couldn't understand what my sister-in-law was talking about and felt completely misunderstood. When I checked Mom's bank account, the balance was too low. "What did you use it for?" My sister-in-law pressed, but I had certainly not done such a thing. It's true that I forgot to deposit the planned $2,000 due to being preoccupied with my mother-in-law's illness and payment procedures, but I never withdrew money from the savings without permission. Is there some misunderstanding? I have made deposits into her account, but I've never looked inside the passbook, I firmly replied. My sister-in-law seemed unsatisfied with my answer and raised her voice. "Come over on Sunday. Let's clarify this matter." This was convenient for me, so I replied, "Understood. Let's discuss it in front of her," and ended the call. On the planned Sunday, Robert arrived at my parents' house earlier than expected. "Oh, you are?" my mother said, surprised at Robert's sudden appearance. "Yes, he's the husband of my late husband's sister." "Mom, you've met him before, haven't you?" I explained. My mother couldn't immediately recall who he was but eventually remembered. "Ah yes, I've seen him before." Seeing my mother's realization and joy, I explained, "Actually, I wanted to consult him about my husband's family matters." After leading Robert to the living room and briefly exchanging greetings, I took out an envelope. "I want you to see this." The envelope contained several photos and a report. As I spread the photos and the report in front of Robert, he exclaimed in surprise, "What is this?" The photos showed my sister-in-law with a young man enjoying herself at a nightclub and heading to a hotel. The report from a detective agency detailed evidence of my sister-in-law's expenses. Jacob entrusted this to me before he passed away, and since he died before we could discuss it, I only recently looked at it. I explained the situation to Robert. Jacob had suspected his sister of reckless spending and had secretly commissioned an investigation. He intended to discuss the results with me but passed away before he could. Robert trembled with anger at the photos. "I thought she was frequently leaving the house, but to think she was doing this," Robert said with a sigh full of indignation. "Amelia, can you come with me right now?" This situation can't be ignored. I had intended to do so from the start and nodded immediately. 30 minutes later, we arrived at my mother-in-law's house and rang the doorbell. "It's Amelia." "I've come as promised," I said. Soon, I heard my sister-in-law's annoyed voice. "How long do you plan to make me wait?" The sound of unlocking the door came, and the door opened. "Come in," my sister-in-law greeted us. But upon seeing Robert, she tried to close the door. Robert quickly grabbed the doorknob. "Lena, we need to talk. Can you listen for a moment?" he said, holding the door. His voice was calm, but his anger was palpable. My sister-in-law struggled to close the door, but couldn't overpower the man's strength and eventually had to leave it open. "Fine. What do you want?" she said, allowing us to stay at the entrance, seemingly not wanting my mother-in-law to be aware of Robert's unexpected visit. "Is that you in these pictures? Who's the man next to you?" Robert asked, confronting his wife with the photos. "Where did you get these? No way." Lena was shocked upon seeing the photos. "Do you remember?" "Well, who is this?" "Answer me." Robert, usually mild-mannered, pressed his wife. "Just a friend. Can I have young friends?" My sister-in-law retorted. "A friend? Don't lie. I know everything," Robert yelled at her. "Why? Who told you?" Realizing my sister-in-law could no longer continue her lies, she looked defeated. "Your late brother Jacob was concerned about your spending and had it investigated." Robert calmly revealed the truth. "You demanded money from your mother and squandered it all on a nightclub. I'm aware of the entire situation." Robert continued, trying to contain his anger. "It's hard enough to pay for Alex's tuition, and you exhaust our living expenses and still dare to ask for more money. What a comfortable life, huh?" he continued, his voice filled with rage. His anger did not subside. "That's enough. I don't care if you leave us. We're getting a divorce," he coldly declared to her. "What?" my sister-in-law muttered in shock. "Didn't you hear me? We're getting a divorce. I'll send the divorce papers later. Fill them out and send them back," Robert stated bluntly. At those words, my sister-in-law collapsed onto a seat. Later, my sister-in-law and Robert proceeded with the divorce through a lawyer and ultimately finalized it. They agreed to consider her spending at the nightclubs as a reason for compensation and to share the payment of Alex's tuition until his university graduation. However, there was a possibility that she might default on the payments, so they agreed that a lawyer would collect the payments monthly. After receiving her share of my father-in-law's inheritance, my sister-in-law had squandered it all on her expenses at the nightclub and then set her sights on my mother-in-law's property. That she found the bank account balance to be lower than expected, and her plan failed. In fact, it seemed that the money Jacob and I had been giving my mother-in-law was used for living expenses and given to my sister-in-law as she demanded, leaving almost no savings behind. My in-law's house belonged to my mother-in-law, and there was probably no more money left to give to my sister-in-law unless the house was sold. I learned from the caregiver that my sister-in-law, realizing her failure, had abandoned my mother-in-law and left. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law continued to live a modest life alone with the help of the caregiver. I hope you guys enjoy our video. To watch more interesting stories, hit that subscribe button. Thank you.